Hi everyone, welcome back to Beyond Zenith, the podcast where we go beyond the title. Today I'm joined by Doug Toulmage, CEO and co-founder of Gradial. Doug, how are you today?
Doing good. Great to be here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. Really excited to have you on. So for anyone who hasn't come across you or Gradial before, could you give us 30 seconds introduction? So who are you, what does Gradial do, and what problem are you solving?
Yeah. My name is Doug. I'm one of the co-founders of Gradial, and my background's actually in aerospace, and so was working at SpaceX for a number of years on Starlink from the early days on the Starlink team. And in 2023, when ChatGPT had just come out, I started Gradial with this idea of how do we build AI agents for large enterprises. And the idea was really, how do we take these LLMs like ChatGPT at the time and use them to automate a lot of the manual work that comes as the company scales. And so with Starlink, we had seen, as the team starts to grow, you spend more and more of your time managing Jira tickets, updating systems, responding to support questions, that kind of thing. And so we really decided to focus on marketing because so much of what a marketing organization runs on is these digital systems. And so Gradial is the platform for building the most AI native marketing team. And so it is a platform that lets you go and build agents that could operate at Fortune 500 scale across all the different activities that go into, making that Super Bowl commercial or going and updating your website or sending an email campaign, launching a promotion, all these things that take actually, many, many hundreds of people, thousands and thousands of hours behind the scenes. And basically taking the copy paste and the manual work out of a lot of those processes so that you can really just focus on that creative connection that you're trying to establish with a customer.
Thank you for that. That was great. And then if we just get back to before the world was watching, so before you created Gradial, and one thing that really stood out to me from our first conversation was long before AI became mainstream, you decided that you wanted to build your career around industries that you believe would shape the next 50 years. What made you think like that?
Yeah. Well, I think it was really just about the time allocation of your life. It's like every day you wake up and you say, how do I want to spend this day, right? Where do I want to actually put my limited time? And I wanted to work on problems that felt like they were hard and were worthy of that time, but also where the progress was going to be measured in decades, not centuries. I think that's something that's really important where, at least for me, I wanted to be able to see that feedback loop a couple times in my career because I think if you don't have problems that you're solving that move fast enough, it's very hard to know if the work you're doing is correct. And so if you really want to improve as a person, you need to work on something that has a fast cycle time. You need to work on something where, every year you can see that you're getting better and the impact you're having is getting better. And so to do that, you need to be in a fast moving industry. And so that was really the thing that I think led me, obviously to be so focused on AI, because I think there's never been a spot that's moved faster than the AI wave here. But also, even things like space where it's like, in the kind of 50 years after Apollo, there were definitely some decades where, the aerospace industry moved very slowly. And there were, decades like the last one where it moved very fast. And I think you have to kind of have a pulse on that and really, be open to saying, I'm going to go work in the area that there's a lot of opportunity and ideally you're early, but not too early.
Nice. And before founding Gradial, you spent several years helping build Starlink during its early days. What was that experience like?
It was very similar to starting a company. And I think at the time I wasn't sure exactly how similar, but now that I've started Gradial here as well and seen Gradial kind of go through a lot of the same people scaling in terms of joining the team, scaling out the team, that kind of thing. Uh, I think with Starlink, there was just a lot of uncertainty of what is the product going to look like? What is the impact we're going to be able to have? I mean, there were open questions of, is the technology going to work? Is it possible to get it to work? When I joined, we had, built these test satellites and it was still very much like, are are these test satellites going to work? Are we going to be able to get the connectivity, the data rate, the also the economies of scale that we need in order to make this a product a success? And I think when I joined the first couple months, I was just kind of learning about some of these tech problems and realizing like, wow, this is pretty risky. This is pretty early. And as a young engineer, that was exciting, but also I was a little worried. Like, is this going to be the right place to start my career? I think by about 12 months in, We got the first 60 satellites in space. We were seeing some early success, and you start to get a picture of how it could actually come together. And I think that's actually very helpful as well when you think about a startup, because a lot of times the barriers that you're going to hit are really perceptual ones, where you really just need to have a little bit of trust that you could actually go continue to grow out of the constraints and the things that are in your way, the obstacles that you perceive. And seeing Starlink go through so many of these scaling obstacles was definitely both a really satisfying experience at the time, but also something that I continue to kind of reference in my head when growing the company here.
Nice. So when you first founded Gradial, do you feel that really gave you a ramp up to, I guess, setting up your business?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think, just watching some of the leadership at SpaceX who had gone through so many different programs, from Dragon to Falcon 1, the way that they handled scaling Starlink and working around, things that came up along the way, the different obstacles, has definitely been something I just refer back to and am inspired by. Because I think the most important thing is there's going to be lots of fires that are burning when you go home, right? You need to be able to get a good night's sleep, knowing that tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to keep working on this problem. And a lot of things, you can actually do a lot more in a month than you think you can, and probably a lot less in a day than you think you can. And so it's important to be comfortable with, there's going to be things that you can't solve in one day, and that does not mean that they're intractable. I think there's this feeling sometimes of like, I can't solve this problem in one day, therefore maybe it's impossible. Maybe I'm actually stuck, right? And a lot of cases, you can actually solve it in about 30 days. And if not 30 days, then, maybe a quarter, like, 90 days, that kind of thing. And so I think having just the kind of calm, methodical approach of like, I'm just going to keep chipping away at this as many hours as I can every day. That's something that, I got to see firsthand on Starlink, because there were many of those types of moments. I remember, a point in time where it's like, we've got all these satellites in space, and, we've got, customers that I could count on, maybe not two hands, but like a very small number of early customers, right? And it's like, each of those scalings, each of those doublings of the customers, they're all hard fought, right? They're never easy. There's always some constraint or another, whether it's, trying to make the hardware fast enough, manufacturing, distribution, customer support. I mean, all of those things at some point or another are going to be a bottleneck. And it's the same with a software company, right? It's like, when you're scaling a software company, very much, you're looking and you're saying, okay, how do we upgrade the product to continue to expand the use cases? How do we go and build out the team that's going to interface directly with customers, whether that's customer support or sales, and I think you just have to be very comfortable with the fact that you're always going to be pressing up against some constraint, and every day you're just chipping away. And that's something that over the course of a year adds up to just quite a lot of, 5% day over day growth. But in the moment, when you go to sleep at the end of the day, you're like, it's hard to measure how much you accomplished, right? And so you have to get some comfort with that.
Nice. And so I imagine when you founded Gradial and you're going down a certain path, if you haven't seen results yet, that helps to know it's going to be coming. Just be patient and keep on going.
Yeah, it's a really core tension of, I think, any startup, which is you have to be extremely impatient, right? No one wants to move faster than a startup. No one wants to move faster than a startup founder, and yet you also have to have balance, right? Because if you're too impatient, then you just give up, right? And so that is, I think, the core challenge of a startup is like, how do you have this like relentless, optimistic, like just desire to move fast, and yet also the follow through of working on hard problems, and chipping away 5% day over day, because 5% day over day obviously adds up to just a tremendous amount over the course of 365 days.
And you've worked across everything from satellite modeling to helping scale Starlink to its first 500,000 users. Looking back, what did that experience teach you about building products at scale?
Well, I think the really cool thing about that was seeing that the hard problems are really the interfaces between different domains, right? And so there's so much cross coupling between, how do we build the hardware, how do we write the software, and how do we distribute to customers, right? And if you treat those as isolated problems, like an org chart might, if you just kind of distribute the problems across an org chart, where you actually hit the scaling friction is in the collaboration between those teams, right? Because if you built the wrong thing, then you're not going to be able to sell it. If you are scaling it in a way that's not reliable, then you're not going to be able to get users to use the product, right? They're going to churn. And so all of those different things, you really need problem solvers who get excited to cross across the intellectual boundaries, right? So you need someone on your sales team who's willing to dive into the product, and you need someone on your product team who cares about go to market. Because if you're not able to cross those kind of chasms between those different domains, then you're just simply not going to be able to do the type of problem solving that's required to scale something that's new.
Nice, thank you. And then on to taking the leap. So ChatGPT arrives, you met your co-founders for brunch, and then within days you left your jobs. Can you walk us through that moment?
Yeah, so it was a very exciting moment, and I think it came from the technology that we were seeing and feeling just with ChatGPT, and believing that it was going to really change how all work gets done in any company. And so it was kind of like a rare moment in life where out of the blue you just make a decision and you're all in, and I think that can be a really exciting and liberating feeling. I think the first 3 or 4 days were amazing, right? Those are like kind of the early days, right? And then I think about 8 weeks in, 6 to 8 weeks in, reality starts to set in, and you realize, okay, I've signed up for something pretty hard, right? And so I think the best analogy would be you kind of arrive in the backcountry to go on a long hike, right? And you're really excited. The first day's awesome, it's beautiful, and then by day 3 or 4, your feet are sore, you've got lots of blisters, you're starting to feel some of the challenge of the journey ahead, and you still got to go hike for 1,000 miles, right? So it's not a short thing, and so I think that's kind of the emotional track there. But I think after those first couple weeks, by 6 months in, you fall in love with the problems, you fall in love with the technology, you start to get a rhythm about it, and that's when you start to realize, okay, this is something that I'm really excited about and I can do for the long term. Because at that point, it's no longer that kind of naive excitement. It's actually like a very authentic excitement about the problem and about what you're working on.
And how long did it take you to get there?
No, I think it takes a couple months. Like I think it's you kind of have to get into really you can't get there until you talk with customers. I think that's the core thing is you don't really have a real product until you've actually given it to a customer. And so for me the kind of hardest part of the startup was when you have an empty calendar, you have zero customers, an empty calendar, and it's like, what do you do with your time, right? And especially coming off of something like building Starlink, which was very enjoyable and obviously very high dopamine because there's just constant things to go work on. I think going to the empty calendar is tough, but as soon as you start to fill that back up with real problem solving for actual customers and for actual value, then the kind of path clarifies in front of you, and it becomes much easier to just say, like, how can I deliver as much as possible for these customers that I'm working for.
And do you remember that moment where you actually felt it and you were like, yes, we've got it?
I think the first was when we basically invented function calling before function calling was in the API. And that was the first moment where we were able to build a demo that we just felt really showed the potential for AI to do something other than answer questions. Because it's hard to kind of put our heads back in the 2023 timeframe because AI is so capable now, right? It can kind of do everything. And so, but if you go back to 2023, it was really, really hard to do some of these use cases that today are easy, where it's like automating software versus answering questions. And so at the core of that was when we first got an agent to reliably produce large JSONs, and I'm talking like 100,000 line JSONs. These are config files that power software, right? And so once we had GPT 3 doing this at scale, that was when I really felt like we had something that from a product perspective had value. We just had to go scale it, and of course, the value that had was kind of a short duration, right? Because eventually some of that came into the APIs as well, and we kind of anticipated that at that point in time. But that was the first moment where I felt like we were really onto something with this idea of configurable software, of automating the actual work rather than just answering questions and building a chatbot. And so I think we got pretty excited at that point.
Nice. And you could have taken the vision into almost any enterprise function finance, HR, legal, but you chose marketing. Why?
So we actually had a whiteboard in our first office, and we wrote out all the different verticals, and we said, who's got an early adopter mentality, who has a ton of software and a ton of config, and who's got a large budget, right? And as you start to kind of go through this, you can eliminate a lot of areas very quickly. And I think what's interesting is, in hindsight, a lot of the areas we eliminated turned out to be great businesses too, which isn't that surprising. There are companies that are doing an amazing job in the legal space, for example. And I think if I go back to 2023, my initial assumption was lawyers are going to be slow to adopt because of concerns about regulation and concerns about things like the disclosures of if I put information into this, am I effectively forfeiting my confidentiality and things like that. Those assumptions turned out to be incorrect, or at least incorrect for enough of the legal world that you've got the Harveys and the Lagoras that grew very fast. But I think for us, we were looking and we were saying, we want to go after a part of the enterprise that has an early adopter mentality. And the reason that I think marketing really does is because it's effectively a competitive sport. And so, marketing teams are always trying to innovate to stand out in the market and to establish a unique connection with a customer. And so, what I love about that is it means that the job is never done. And so, even if AI goes and completely transforms the marketing landscape in the next couple of years, there's going to be continued innovation. It's never going to be 100% complete. I think when you look at something like, for example, accounting or bookkeeping software, right? What do you do once you've reconciled all the books? What do you do once you've approved all the expense reports, right? Maybe you can offer some insights on top of that. Maybe you can, try to offer ways to optimize the budget. But, there really is this kind of limit of how deep you can go into some of these workflows, at least in my opinion, that I think doesn't exist in an effectively competitive landscape like marketing. So that's something that was exciting to us as well, because we were thinking along the lines of when the models get 10x better, how do you continue to find hard problems to deploy those models against? And I think in marketing, the hardest problem in the enterprise is how do I grow my business? And marketing is fundamentally tied to how I grow my business. And so if we continue to innovate on the marketing side, there's always going to be appetite to continue to grow the business. Whereas if you're really focused on cutting expenses, once you've cut the expenses by 80%, 90%, 99%, it's asymptotically harder to generate value. Whereas in marketing, if I can grow revenue 1%, 1.5%, it's actually unbounded in the upside potential that you could offer your customers.
Nice. And so people then have all this rich data that they can then use to drive different decisions, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think it's really just that marketing is core to growing the business, right? It's core to driving revenue. And if you can increase the capability of your marketing organization every year, that's something you're always going to want to do. You're never going to be like, my marketing is done. I've fully solved it, right? It's never solved. Whereas other things like, automating HR, it's possible that you might feel like you kind of have solved it, right? There are problems. I mean, there's things that we used to do in large enterprises manually that are effectively solved, right? And so that's kind of where you want to work on something that is never going to be solved because you want to be working to continuously raise the bar.
Nice. And one topic I'd really like to explore is workflows, as I thought your perspective on this was really interesting. So for someone who's never worked inside a large enterprise, can you paint us a picture? What does a typical enterprise marketing workflow look like?
Yeah, so I think the key thing to think about here is there are so many different teams that are involved in a large enterprise. So in a campaign, like a Super Bowl commercial or any large campaign, like a promotion that you're doing, for the fall or something like that, you're going to start with some brief, some goal, some idea that's driving the business. And this might be starting from the product team. It might be starting from, corporate strategy. It could be starting from a campaign planner in the marketing organization. And that is getting handed off to hundreds of different people over the life cycle of that campaign. So for example, you've got to go and talk to your video producer who's going to go and maybe do filming across the world to go create some, pieces for that piece of media that you're producing. But then you need editors, then you need motion graphic designers, and then you need to bring in your brand to come in and understand, is this actually representing the brand correctly? Are we using the right color scheme? Are we using the right motion graphics? And then what about the copy? What about the story we're telling? And of course, a lot of these campaigns touch more than one channel. And so, if I'm going to go do this YouTube ad, for example, does it have a link to my website? If so, what's on the website? Does it say the right thing? Are we using the same brand language on the website as we are in the video? And if you think about the large enterprise, each of those is a team. The web person is a team. The video person is a team. They're not necessarily on the same team. They're often not even in the same time zone. And so the number of handoffs that you have, it's really all happening in Slack and email and Microsoft Teams, whatever the tool scheme that people use are. In a lot of cases, they've got custom software that they use to manage that campaign. So, in some cases, you have a big Excel spreadsheet with, hundreds and hundreds of rows of to-do items that have to be done. In other cases, it's in Jira or Workfront or one of these project management tools. And that's really where the complexity starts to multiply. Because if you have 100 people in 100 time zones, obviously not 100 different time zones, but if you have 100 people all distributed around the world, you end up with this problem where the same task gets handed off all these times, and each time it gets handed off, it takes longer.
And throughout the workflow, at what point would you say things usually become difficult?
I think that the difficulty is you're trying to go fast, but each step introduces friction. So the friction is really the difficult part, which is, how many times have you asked someone a question over an email or a Slack and they haven't responded to you in less than 24 hours? Like that happens every day. Or someone gives you a to-do item and they say, hey, go update the website. And then they forget to attach the file. They forget to attach that PDF or the image that you need, right? That's really where the difficulty comes from. And it's something that's very, very hard to eliminate because it's not in a single system. It's not in a single tool. It's really just, organizational process that is the bottleneck. And it's something that is not so dissimilar from launching a rocket, like all the pieces have to arrive on time. All the parts have to be on time, right? It's like you have a campaign plan for going and doing a launch campaign. And it's the same thing for a marketing campaign. And in a lot of cases, it's in the same project management tools.
And when you first started speaking with customers, what surprised you most about the way teams were working?
Well, this is kind of a funny one, but I was very surprised that marketing teams talk about bill of materials for marketing campaigns because that is something that is exactly the same language that people use in supply chain and in manufacturing. When talking about the materials that you need to go build like a satellite or a car or something like that. So I think it is really the biggest surprise for me is like just how similar business processes are across very disparate parts of organizations. And I think that's been one of the joys for me about building Gradial. And I think it's something that people just seriously underestimate. Like they really think that these things are different and they're not. They're actually way more similar than they are different at the end of the day. And I think the other thing that's very interesting is in a world in which the specialization of knowledge work is reduced dramatically by AI, I think that these business processes will actually look more similar in the future, not less similar. Because today it's like there's kind of, the special tribal knowledge that you need to call yourself an electrical engineer, special tribal knowledge that you need to call yourself a designer, right? Those kind of, those pools of knowledge are now something that you can access to some extent via, something like, Claude or OpenAI or one of these models, right? And so the more that becomes true, I think the more similar the different teams in the enterprise look, which is actually really exciting because, I've always thought of myself as a generalist and I get excited about that. I want to work on all the problems. I don't want to be, looking at just one part of a business, all the time. And so I think that's been a big surprise for me is just how true that is. And I think it's something that will be even more true in 5 years than it is today.
And what made you realize that it simply wasn't a software problem, it was actually a workflow problem?
Well, you really just need to talk to a marketer for probably 15 minutes to get that. And so from the very first conversation, that was clear. I think, I was skeptical the first time that I talked to someone because it was like, I wanted to corroborate it. I wanted to get some more data points from other marketers. But by the fourth or fifth conversation, everybody's telling the same story, which is like, I live my life in tickets. And, that's not what I got into marketing to do. I got into marketing to be creative, and I'm spending all my time, trying to leave comments in tickets, asking people to update the workflow. Right. And so, I think it was surprising. But it was also something that once I saw it, it was kind of semi-obvious to me, because it was something that, you just see that in any part of an enterprise. And so, it really, it fit my kind of, my understanding from engineering as well.
Yeah, and I imagine it must have been really exciting speaking to different marketing teams and customers and then seeing a trend of actually you can help and everyone has the same problem shows you how much you can scale the product.
It's definitely a really cool feeling in a startup when you do 20 customer conversations and you realize that 18 of them said the same thing. They're not all going to say the same thing. It's going to be, somewhat messy kind of collecting that product market fit, but you start to coalesce this vision and you realize, if I can build these 3 or 4 features, I actually have something that's a real product. That's a very exciting feeling. And then I think, the trick is to realize that that's not a one-off process. It's a continuous process, right? And I think, especially with the current world of AI that we're in, you have to be redesigning your product every 3 months. I would have probably said 6 months a couple months ago. Like, I think that the velocity's actually increased. I think, in the first year, we were basically rewriting all of our code every 6 months. Now I'm trying to actually, think about the product, evolving even on a 2 or 3 months time frame, because I think the ability to go unlock new workflows is accelerating with the models in the enterprise. And so, I think it's an exciting, moment the first time you get that product market fit signal, but it's something that you actually need to be reassessing literally every week or even every day as you grow, just because, the market is changing and the product capabilities are changing.
And I was going to ask you that if I spent a day sitting next to one of your customers before they started using Gradial, where would I see them spending most of their time? And I know you mentioned ticketing, so I don't know if there's any other areas. And then after one of your customers using Gradial, what changes?
Well, I think the tickets are one of the big ones, right? Where, before, you're spending a lot of time going through the tickets, responding, and then you actually have to go do the manual tasks, right? So, here's a very common example. Someone's attached a Word doc to a ticket and they want you to go and either, build an email campaign or update a website based on that Word doc. And you're going through 20 pages of a Word doc and you're copy pasting, in some cases, hundreds of fields out of tables in a Word doc, and you're copy pasting them over into your CMS, your content management system, one piece at a time. And, it can be very tedious. Like, one of the cool things is, whenever we automate a process like this, we try to do it ourselves manually to understand it for real. And so I've gone through that process, and it's a lot of work. I mean, there's times where if you do it for a couple hours, you're gonna, like, unless you have an ergonomic mouse, you're gonna be feeling the just the repetitiveness of that in your joints, right? It's like, it's a lot of clicks. And after Gradial, you're just saying to Gradial, hey, go do this ticket for me, right? All of those clicks are gone. All of those steps are gone. And so, in that case, several hours of work in just that one example for that one ticket, just, completely handled by the agent for the same output. And then you can actually ask yourself the question of, well, was this even the right website update to make? Was this even the right email campaign to run? And a lot of times, in the steady state before Gradial, there wasn't time for that question. You actually needed to spend too much time just doing the work to really have the spare bandwidth to really think about the storytelling. And so that's, I think, the big change. And then I think, in terms of some of the other changes, I think that there's other parts of the business that are users as well, rather than creative production. People spend a lot of time in Teams calls. They spend a lot of time talking about a campaign. And so I think the ability to go from an idea to seeing a first draft quickly is another big change. It used to be, you would get on a phone call, you would talk about your campaign brief. It might take you 2 weeks to get a first draft to review. So the cycle time was very, very, very long. With Gradial, you can get that first draft prototype in, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And so you can actually have those conversations live during during like a Teams call. You can actually be, iterating together and see updates to an email or website or campaign. And I think that really lets you be a lot more agile in the creative process as well.
Nice. And when customers first see Gradial in action, what's normally the moment when everything clicks?
I think when they see the to-do list of a campaign, like all the steps, and they see the agent just executing one step after another, that's the light bulb moment. But I will say that that's something like that light bulb moment is always going to be something that changes as the technology evolves. Like in 2024, just seeing an agent do anything, any work at all, was a light bulb moment. Because I think in 2024, people really weren't confident yet that these agents could even exist, right? Especially, outside Silicon Valley. So it's an evolving light bulb moment as the technology continues to grow and proliferate.
Nice. And how do your customers actually measure success, and what outcomes are they trying to achieve?
Well, I think it comes down to being able to go from an idea to marketing campaigns as fast as possible. So the speed of the execution, the volume that the agent can handle, the number of manual steps that no longer are needed. Those are all metrics that customers care about. And for different teams, the priority can be different. There's teams where speed is everything. Like they want to be more agile. They want to get more campaigns out the door faster. There's others where it's like we've got this big backlog and we want to just go eliminate the backlog. We've got 10,000, tasks that we want to go run, and we've been trying to do them manually, and we just haven't been able to get through them. And so here at Gradial, go do this manual work, go do this backlog for us. So different teams have different objectives, but it's really about the throughput, the cycle time, the speed that you can go be agilely executing a campaign, and then the capacity.
And have any of your customers got any data or stats where they've been able to actually measure, right, this has saved us X amount of time or X amount of this?
Yeah, no, we've had a number of customers look into this, and I think the common one is most customers were measuring their campaigns in weeks. So a campaign was taking weeks. I mean, in some cases, 6 weeks, right? And people have been able to go from 6 weeks to 6 hours. And that's including the manual review. That's including, getting the stakeholders together to go approve things. And so it really depends on the team. But that's kind of the order of magnitude that we see is going from weeks to a single day or hours. And it's dependent on, what are the human steps that are part of the process? Because there should be human steps. There are reviews that you need. But how can the agent go streamline that so that you're not doing all those manual handoffs in between?
Nice. And on to building Gradial. So every founder talks about product market fit, but it's one of those things that's difficult to define. How did you know when you generally found yours?
Well, I think it helps to go sell something without product market fit and see how hard it is. And then the moment where you have something that has product market fit, it's not going to suddenly be easy. But if you have it, it's going to be a lot easier, right? And I think that was something where, we started talking with marketers, and people were basically saying something to the effect of, how fast can we try this? Like, when can you do a POC for us, right? That language was so different from the very first thing we were trying to sell, where it was like we were trying to, squeeze out a yes, right? It was like, how can I get someone to say yes to even just do a POC? I remember we had someone who we built this great automation for in the first couple weeks of the company. And, they basically tried to negotiate us down from $1,000 a month to $250 a month. And it was just like, the value just clearly wasn't there. And then conversely, once we had this, this product that was focused on marketers, we just started getting a lot more excitement, and you could just hear it in people's voices.
And once you found it, what changed inside the company?
Well, it was an interesting moment because in some ways we actually found product market fit for two separate products at the same time. And we had this product that was really going in and trying to do the manual work inside marketing teams, right? Like do the manual work, updating websites, email campaigns, that kind of thing. We had this other product that was focused on helping you with CRM hygiene and reporting. And we had product market fit signals on both. And it became a question of, can we do both or do we need to specialize? So I think the big change within the company is before product market fit, you're in exploration mode. You're out there trying to find all of the, like kind of, I think another founder kind of used the term, you're like a truffle seeker, like looking for these truffles buried in the dirt, right? And once you find one, you need to abandon everything else. You need to focus down on that one thing. And that's a very hard, like, mental switch, right? Because you've been in search mode for so long and you're all breath and no depth, no focus. And then when you find product market fit, you need to be willing to throw out all those other ideas. And in some cases, that means actually going to some early design partners or even, formal customers and saying, hey, we really appreciate the work that we've been doing together. We really appreciate, this exploration that you did with us. And I'm talking about like the $250 a month customer. You go to the $250 a month customer and you say like, I'm just going to give you the code. I'm going to give you the product here because I really appreciate what you've done with us. But we're actually not going to pursue this any further. And that's a high conviction, moment that you have to lean into. So that's the big change is when you decide, I'm not going to spread myself across, 3 or 4 or 5 bets, right? I'm going to go focus on one product. I have to build one product.
And today you're working with some incredibly large organizations. What has enterprise customers taught you that you didn't expect when you first started the business?
Well, I think it teaches you just how important your sales organization is and the customer success organization and all of the customer relationship building is just such a critical part of a company, because at the end of the day, people want to work with people that are fun to work with and that are that they like, right? That they respect. And so I think just the importance of hiring and building the right team can't be underestimated. I think you have to have a personal relationship with customers in an enterprise business, because there's a finite number of enterprises. It's not something where people are going online and signing up with their credit card and there's zero human connection, right? It's something where they want to be able to believe that they can give you a call and that they can have a conversation about the product, and that's just a very different type of business. And so I think the importance of that is something that you definitely learn very quickly in the enterprise space, but also I think it's something that is even more important as we continue to see AI progress, because enterprises are fundamentally going to continue to be about people relationships, across, the whole industry. And this is not just about, customers, but also partners, right? Like, partners that are potentially suppliers, but also customers. And so I think, the other thing you see in large enterprise is that there's often more than one relationship between companies, right? There's companies who are partners, customers, suppliers, and competitors all at the same time, especially at the largest enterprises. And I think that is something that you definitely learn about as well when building in that kind of space.
And do you ever connect with the other partners and see if you can do something together?
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah. I think that, for us, at least at Gradial, we just strongly believe in building an open ecosystem. I think, the good example here is when someone logs into their desktop, they're using a whole bunch of different tools, right? You're using Microsoft Word, you're using a Google Doc, you're going and opening up, Photoshop or something, right? And so all of the work that you're doing is really, it's not going to ever be one platform. It's going to be many different things. And I think in the agentic world, they need to be able to talk to each other. They need to be able to connect and hand off work and hand off tasks. And I think that has a ton of implications from, going and investing the time to build out great relationships and partnerships across the industry.
And one thing I found really interesting from our first conversation was that the more complex an organization becomes, the bigger the opportunity you see for AI. Why is that?
I think there's an inherent economy of scale there where like you just have so much work to do. So if you just say that AI correlates with the amount of work that an organization does, just the sheer number of hours of work correlates with the size of the enterprise. And so I think, it's driven by the products and the complexity. Like they have more customers, they have more relationships to manage, they've got more support tickets, they've got more product landing pages on their website, they've got more campaigns to run. So across the enterprise, I think the amount of work really correlates with scale, and it's just kind of just pure economies of scale that's driving that under the hood.
Nice, thank you. And large enterprises already have decades of software and established ways of working. How do you introduce something new without asking people to completely reinvent how they operate?
Well, I think for Gradial, it's been open ecosystem, right? We connect with most of those existing tools that they already have. We've got native integrations across all their workflow. And so on day one, we're not necessarily saying go change everything. We're saying bring in an agent and have it do your existing workflow faster and more easily, right? That said, I think enterprises are in a position right now where they really believe that they should be transforming their stack. Like every enterprise that I've talked to wants to reevaluate the way that they're doing work to optimize for AI. And that's one of the unique things about this particular technology wave. I think people are all in early because, even at the board of director level of a large company, they're talking about what's our AI strategy. And they've been doing that since 2023. And I think that is very different from other eras of I think, transformation. I think even in the cloud era, I think it took longer for people to be all in on cloud computing. It was less of an obvious must have, right? There was a case to be made of, is cloud even going to be cheaper? Like, how can it be cheaper, right? We've got someone extracting margin on top of the compute. Like, is it actually good to move to the cloud? And there's obviously security concerns. And so you had this 10, 15-year adoption journey where, there's still a huge amount of workloads in large enterprise that are not in the native cloud. I think with AI, it was different. I think from day one, the people who are on your board of directors were literally using ChatGPT, at home with their kids. And so you have this level of awareness of the transformation so early in the cycle that the speed at which companies are moving just is not comparable to a lot of prior transformation cycles.
Nice. And AI is evolving incredibly quickly, as we know, but big enterprise naturally just move a bit more cautiously. How do you balance innovation with trust?
Well, I think it's really important to not try to paint everything with the same brush. And so it's like, what are the data sets that I'm connecting the AI to? What are data sets that I'm comfortable with? What are data sets I'm not comfortable with? What are applications I'm comfortable with? Because I think when you start to go through it, there's so many workflows that make so much sense to connect with agents. And there really is no inherent risk to it because the agent's not necessarily publishing content or it's not working in an unsupervised way. And so it's about the workflow and the controls in that aspect as well of, okay, where's my QA step? Where's my review step? Is there a human in the loop for the right tasks? This is another reason why we got into marketing. I think it's harder to gain trust with connecting an agent to, internal data than it is to external data, because inherently a lot of the marketing space, the final output is intended to be for people to see. And then you have conversations about, okay, what about like confidential campaigns, like a campaign that's not ready for launch yet? How do I make sure that that's not connected to the ability to publish? But those are very simple things that you can put in place, right? Because when you're designing the software, you can just say, well, I'm not going to give the agent access to information it shouldn't have. I'm not going to give it access to tools and capabilities it shouldn't have, like for example, publishing without a reviewer.
And do your customers have to have their data set up in a certain way to be able to use your product?
No, I mean, that's really one of the core things that we've solved for building the kind of enterprise marketing harness is being able to flexibly connect to the data that they already have. That's definitely a hard problem, but it's something that, we spend a lot of time on, just making sure that the product can interface with all the different ways that they can store that information.
And where do you think businesses are still getting AI wrong today?
That's a good question. I think the biggest mistake that I see is balancing the internal adoption politics across the team, where there's this incentive of, should I have one central AI project and everyone has to use that one project? Or should I have different projects at the team or the org level? And it's a really hard problem because there's obviously advantages to putting all your resources in one big project. But inevitably those projects end up moving slower because, unless you've got like the exact right leader in the right spot, they get caught in the kind of internal bureaucracy. Everyone's got a stakeholder, everyone's a committee member. But conversely, if you go too distributed, then each of these teams are doing their AI initiatives and they're kind of overlapping and they don't really talk to each other. I think that's the hardest problem. And I don't know if there's even an easy answer. I think it's definitely the place, though, where there's the biggest struggle right now in the large companies. Like, what's the right balance of distributed AI projects at the team level versus centralized projects, and how do you get them to move as fast as possible?
From everything you've seen with working with different customers, is there anything that you can recommend at all that could help?
Well, I think the biggest thing you can do is work with partners who are incentivized to build an open ecosystem. And I think the reason for that is inherently those are going to be more future-proof platforms. So, for example, if I go all in building with a specific closed, walled garden ecosystem, whether that's one of the foundation labs or someone else, it's going to be very hard to take the value that I've built in that platform with me to the next platform. And we're in this world where, the models are commoditizing. The differences between the models, continue to kind of change week over week. And if you've kind of bet the farm on one vendor, and their walled garden of agents and runtimes and things like that, it's going to be hard to not have that be a 6 month setback when something better comes out or something else changes. And so I think you want to work with startups and ecosystems and builders that are open ecosystems where they work with all the different models. They let you own your own data. They're not forcing you into a custom agent runtime that all of the skills and knowledge base is kind of basically isolated from you and kind of locks you in. I think it's really important that you work with someone who is building an enterprise harness that has the governance, that has all the controls, but is incentivized to work with other agents and not basically force you only into their ecosystem and their models.
Yeah, it makes sense because people have different preferences, and I'm sure if you asked like 100 people what LLM is their favorite, you'd probably get a mix of different answers.
Well, I mean, there's a new LLM every week, right? It's like, I think the number of model releases just in the last 2 or 3 months is hard to keep up with. We had Opus 5 last week. And so I think, people's preferences, yes, those are part of it, but I think it's more than that, which is like, if you built your entire AI strategy around like proprietary tools from OpenAI or Anthropic, what are you going to do when you realize that you actually want to introduce like some open source models or vice versa, right? And that's where I think having an enterprise harness that's model agnostic is so important, and having one that is incentivized to be an open ecosystem where that same enterprise harness for the task can connect to all these models, and it can also talk to all your other agents. And it's not forcing you to go build proprietary knowledge in a closed framework that you don't have access to. Because as these models get better, there's going to be learning, and there's going to be, insights that the models start to derive and build in a knowledge base. And if that insights in that learning is happening in a proprietary platform that is locked to a model provider, right, and it basically only is compatible with one of the foundation models, then you're not going to be able to take that with you if you need to switch models later. Conversely, if you have a partner, something like Gradial or another platform where that knowledge base is actually something that you inherently own, and you can take that knowledge base with you to any platform, to any model, and you can use it with multiple agents, then I think you're building something that becomes part of your long-term intellectual property as a business, which is I think really important.
Yeah, and I imagine in years to come, it won't be sustainable if you don't have something built like that.
It won't be sustainable, and you're gonna definitely spend a lot more money, because I think there's business models that are built around selling you tokens that obviously want to maximize how many tokens they sell you, but that's not necessarily aligned with the value that the customer is getting.
And then I want to touch on your founder journey. So, going from building inside one of the world's most ambitious companies to building your own must have been a huge shift. What surprised you most about becoming a founder?
Oh, I think I was surprised. I touched on this earlier, but I was surprised by what it felt like having an empty calendar. That was the hardest part so far in building a company for me, is like when you just have an empty calendar and it's like, what do you do with your time? So that was the biggest transition, I would say, because a lot of the scaling problems, even when you get to like kind of subscale, a lot of the scaling problems felt very familiar to being at SpaceX. I think the pre-scale, the like empty whiteboard, empty calendar, like that is a problem that you really don't have to deal with when you work at a place like SpaceX, right? There's obviously a huge backlog of projects and work that need to be done, and there's really it's constrained by time and people, right? It's not constrained by ideas. But when you start a company, you have to pick the ideas, and the reality is most ideas are actually not that good. And the only way to improve your ideas is to go and put time against them, right? So, I think Paul Graham has an essay on this, and it's something I remember reading at this point in time, which is like, you're not trying to necessarily get product market fit with your initial idea. You're trying to have an initial idea that is in the vicinity, right? You got to get close enough that there's lots of fertile ground around your initial idea that you can branch into. And I think for us, that was this idea of, enterprise agents and automating the ticket and automating manual work. Like that was a fertile ground. That was a good direction. And we were maybe 6, 12 months early to that idea, maybe more than that, but like, somewhere between maybe 12 and 18 months in terms of where the market was. And that was the right kind of way to start it. But then once you get to that fertile ground, you have to have an open mind. And, if you're too opinionated, where you're like, the company I'm trying to start is XYZ, a lot of times you're going to get it wrong because, you probably were too specific in the idea that you were going for. So I think that kind of discovery process is very, very hard. I'm not sure it can be fully taught, and I don't know that it's easily. I don't think it's the same every time. I think if you start 10 companies, you're going to have a different discovery process every time, and it's going to be hard work every time you do it. But that's the thing that is really truly different between starting a company, in my opinion, and even joining an early stage company or a high growth or high intensity company.
And what's been significantly harder than you expected?
Um, well, I think, I mean, that's obviously one of them. I think most things are harder than you expect, right? Most things are harder than you expect, but they get easier faster than you expect, right? You kind of get used to it faster, right? I think that hiring people outside of a brand initially is much harder than you expect, right? If you're used to hiring people for something like SpaceX, it's very easy to hire for people at SpaceX. Everyone knows SpaceX. Um, I think that as you get practice at it, though, it gets a lot easier. So a lot of these things kind of follow this kind of this perception curve where it's like the first time you do it, it's way harder than you expect, right? And then over time, you get much better at it than you expect. And so it does start to normalize back to something where, either you get better or it gets easier. I don't know which it is, but, also you start to build your own brand. And, if you hire the right people, they make it easier to hire the next people, right? And so I think a lot of things like that, the first time you set up a bank account is way harder than you expect. It was an embarrassingly, tough problem to go figure out how do we open a bank account? And of course you have to go in person. And it's like, I'm not used to going to things in person. Where can I go to, open a bank account in person, right? So there's a lot of those, payroll and taxes in the different states. These are all harder than you expect. But then once you do it, they become easier pretty quickly. So that's, I think, the way I see a lot of problems in the startup is there's always something that feels much harder for about 5, 6 weeks, and then it gets easier from there. Like getting insurance, right? Getting your insurance set up. It's like none of these things are easy for startups. Although I know there's a lot of startups that are out there trying to make these kind of picks and shovels type workflows easier for other startups. And I think that's always been a great business model of, sometimes people start companies because they go encounter one of these things when they're trying to build their startup and they realize, hey, this is pretty hard. Maybe we should go sell this to other startups. So that's a good example of, finding that product market fit. For us, we didn't go that route, but that's I can see why people do it, because there's so many of these little problems like that are surprisingly hard for an early stage company.
Yeah, when you do something the first time, it's never going to be as good as when you do it again and again, and you kind of know not to go to this area or to do this. And
Yep, totally.
on the flip side, what's been more rewarding than you've imagined?
Well, I think, um, I get excited about every time we onboard a customer, every workflow that the product runs, every capability that we're able to add that delivers value. It's just continuously exciting to have a product in the world that is something people love. And I want to continue to earn that every day for the company and for what we're doing in the future. So that's something that I would say is extremely rewarding. I think when you bring the team together and you have a chance to just reflect on every 6 months, every couple months, like the new folks that have joined, what's been accomplished, the growth that people on the team have had. Those are all great moments too. But I think, yeah, there's so many things like that. And then of course, the challenge is how do you have enough of that kind of purposeful reflection while also, doing your day job, right? Because I think, at least for me, a lot of times, the kind of forward goals are easy to have, be the focus too.
So, Doug, as Gradial has grown, how has your role changed as a leader?
Yeah. I like to say that, in a startup, the role is different every 6 months, maybe even every 3 months. And I think, part of it is in the earliest days, you're just trying to build the product. And so you're doing all the different jobs, but you're spending a lot of time just writing software and trying to figure out how to build the thing that you're trying to do. And that was very satisfying. But, the larger the company gets, the less that time spent, doing software and building the product really scales, and the more that you need to be spending time doing other things, whether that's talking to customers or trying to go and hire the right people. I think ultimately the job of any founder, and especially a CEO, is to hire the right people to build the company. And so I think that's the biggest material change is the fraction of time spent just doing interviews continues to grow. I think probably I'm averaging around 40 to 50% on some days and on certain weeks. And I try to make sure I have some time where on a Saturday or Sunday or something, I'm able to sit down and continue to be in the product and build things. But I would say that, yeah, the fraction over time that is either on a customer call or interview, one way or another, continues to grow. And I expect that's going to continue to be a big part of the role. But then again, 6 months from now, there's probably going to be even still different things that start to take hold. And I think as you bring on more leaders in the company, trying to figure out how you enable your leadership team to be as effective as possible, and the right balance there is another thing that continues to evolve, where it's like, what are the things you do yourself? What are the decisions that you need to make? What are the things where you're actually holding the company back by trying to kind of be in the loop? Because in some cases, if you're insisting on making a decision, you might actually be trying to go faster, but you might be moving the company slower. And so, pushing that decision making as distributed as possible through the company, I think is really important. And that's kind of an area that I'm thinking a lot about right now in terms of how the role's evolving. But again, like, in the early days, the ability to make decisive decisions as a team of, 5-10 people, that can be a big part of the role. And so early on, making all the decisions yourself can be really good. And I think as you get larger, you still want to make the right decisions, and you still want to have involvement on the big decisions. But there's so many things that don't ultimately matter that much. Like, for example, the logistics of, what snacks are going to be in the office or something like that. I'm making this up as a very, specific example, but I think, having a gut on not wasting time, not wasting time playing startup, but actually building startup. I think there's a lot of decisions that feel important, and I kind of put that in the category of you're playing startup. You're not actually building a startup if you focus on those. And so one of the key things as the role evolves is, I think, really trying to remind yourself what are the things that really matter, what are the things that are going to build the business, and what are the decisions that they're fun because they actually are not that important. And it's the worst kind of procrastination. Is as the role evolves, there's a lot of work that doesn't actually move the needle that is kind of fun and satisfied. Even things like coding. I think that's the other really important and difficult one is like, there's jobs that you might really enjoy doing that actually don't matter that much. And, and they're in the same kind of camp as like picking the snacks in the office, right? It's like, you feel productive, but like if you send 100 emails about, something that doesn't move the needle, it doesn't help customers or help you hire the right people, like, you're not actually, building the company, you're just feeling busy. So, those are the sorts of things I think about as the role evolves and, expect to continue to see.
Nice. And you've raised more than 110 million in 16 months and grown ARR more than tenfold. What has changed inside the company as a result of growing at that speed?
Yeah. Well, it gets back to the people growth and the hiring. I think, the team has expanded quite a bit and the scope of, the customers we're serving has expanded quite a bit. And so you end up needing to continue to redesign the organization for scale. And you're trying to look, further and further in the future. I think when you're a small company, you can afford to almost plan things week to week because you really are just a couple people, very little coordination, and you're just trying to go figure out what are we going to do tomorrow. I think as the company grows and your customer base grows, you start to have to look further and further ahead, which is tricky because no one can predict the future, especially in a market that's moving this fast. And so you're looking as far as possible ahead, but you're also adjusting the plan, continuously. And it is kind of, it's still a very relatively small container ship, but it kind of is like the container ship where, you need to be steering with some purpose, like, well in advance in order to end up where you want to go. But you also need to be constantly course correcting because the market's moving so fast. So I think that's a big change. What I mean by that is, looking ahead and like when you're a small company, if you're missing a key part of your team, like let's say that you haven't hired anyone on product marketing, when all you need to do is go hire one person, you can actually get that done pretty fast. But when you're starting to scale and you realize, wait a second, we actually need to have the sales team be a lot larger, or we need to have an international team or something like that. Some of those decisions have a lead time that is very hard to compress, and especially if you want to keep the quality of the team really strong. And so I think that's where things start to evolve in terms of how you're thinking about the organization and building the kind of the scaffolding of the organization as it scales.
Was it hard because growing very fast, keeping the culture, getting the right people, and then delivering the service that you want? Did you find that quite difficult, or was it quite easy for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's definitely all difficult, but I think, the biggest thing is getting, you know, building a team with the right folks in the first 10, 15 people really pays dividends because, that becomes the cornerstone of your culture. And if you have the momentum, then it's a self-reinforcing culture where, the culture, encourages the right people who are excited about a startup to come and join the culture because they see the culture and they're excited about it. Conversely, if the culture is not there, it's very hard to change because the folks that are excited about the culture that you want to build are looking and they're like, this isn't the culture that you have. And so I think that's probably the most important thing is I feel very lucky by the folks who chose to join Gradial, especially at the earliest point in the company. And I think that's continuing to be a big part of the culture today.
And on to looking ahead, if we were having a conversation again in sort of 2 to 3 years' time, how do you think enterprise workflows will have changed?
Yeah, I think we will have extremely long duration agents that no longer really fit into the workflow category cleanly. And so you think about what someone does in a workflow. Workflow is like it's the ideal process that often is not followed, right? And so if a workflow was really consistent, it would in some ways be automatable, right? It would just be code. It's the messy aspects of the workflow that make the workflow actually work and actually, take effort to complete. And so I think as the agents get more capable, you're going to end up with these very long duration agents within each of the different functions of the business. And you're actually going to start to remove the workflow because workflow becomes a crutch, which is like, this is what you do when you don't have, kind of full decision making authority and you don't have an understanding of what needs to be done. Once you have all of the tribal knowledge and the agent really can be trusted with many different open-ended tasks, then you might start to say, I'm not going to give an agent a workflow, I'm going to give it an objective. And the workflow becomes implicit as opposed to explicit. Now, I think the question is, does that happen in 12 months or does that happen in 5 years, right? Like there's some spectrum here. I think it's very clear that within 10 years, you're going to have very long duration agents. And I think that's a pretty conservative estimate. So I think that's my big prediction is you're going to start to have more objective driven agents rather than workflow driven agents. The tricky part is objective driven agents require some sort of governance and oversight that, I think, we don't have the comfort level, we as a society yet to really hand off control to. And I think the interplay of like, what does that look like and how do you collaborate with one of these agents and how do you set a vision and set a course as the kind of creative and the leader of those agents is something that's still an open question. Now, I'm really excited about it because I think it resembles the version of work that we all would like to have, which is one where it's more about our ideas and our creativity and the story we're trying to tell and less about the manual clicks and the updates and things like that. I mean, I think even workflow can be, it can be a drag, right? It's like, it exists for a reason, but it can be a heck of a lot of work to follow, whether that's your kind of QA process or your updates or things like that. Now, I think that where we're going is a world in which all of that is still happening. Your agent is doing QA. Your agent is doing review. It's checking your brand guidelines. It's doing all of these logistical steps. But the day that you start trusting it to be 100% accurate, the workflow no longer matters because the workflow was there to enforce governance. It was there to enforce process because of the risk of messing up. But once you reach a point where the agent literally will never mess up, even if you actively try to get it to mess up, because it's so aligned with the organization's guidelines, then I think you end up in a spot where it's a little bit more freeform. And there's lots of great metaphors for this, but it's like to kind of take like the Iron Man metaphor, it's like Tony Stark talking to Jarvis, right? There's no workflow there. It's a free form thing. You're talking to this agent and you're just giving it an objective.
And do you think, because there's, especially in the enterprise world, there's so many failed transformations and implementations, and a lot of the time it's because a lot of the workflows, the process is never carried over. It's always implement the tool and then the people then come after, and that's not really how it works. So do you think that would bring that down as we see a lot more agents in that space?
I know, I think it will. I mean, I think, workflow is often trying to design the part before you, rather than it's basically trying to design a pathway to an objective. And a lot of times it is not the most efficient way to the objective, right? And so I think as you add agents, you will find that the agents are able to achieve the same objective in a more efficient way, whether that's, doing QA in a different way at a different time or different step or, something else altogether.
And what excites you most about where Gradial is heading over the next 2 to 3 to 5 years?
I get excited every day by how we can expand the envelope of what AI is able to do for marketing teams. I mean, I think there's so many use cases that are really completely untapped. And the hard part is there's this massive capability overhang between what the models are capable of and where there is widespread adoption. And that becomes the thing that we get really passionate about it going and continuing to solve. And when I think about specifically where we're at, it seems like that capability overhang is actually growing, not shrinking, where like the rate of adoption is actually much slower than the rate of progress. And I think that's going to continue to be true. And so, really just bridging that gap has been a big part of what I think software should do, right? In the same way that you used to have these really powerful microprocessors, right? And the job of software was to take the raw capability of the hardware and make it do useful things. And I think it's a very similar situation now where you have these extremely capable models that can do, most things that you want them to do if they're in the right harness, if they're in the right framework and scaffolding, and they have the right security and governance and permissions and all the other things. And so, I'm looking forward to the use cases that seem non-obvious right now. Like, for example, in-person events are going to be an increasingly important part of marketing, not just for software companies, but for every company. And I think, including industries that, didn't necessarily do a lot of event-driven marketing in the past. So in those in-person events, how do you use agents to help, organize the logistics of an event? They're not going to do everything. They're not going to be, physically standing at the event, talking to potential customers. That human connection still has to come from the people on the team. But they might be able to handle things like getting you the restaurant reservations that you need, going and organizing the printouts and the vinyl that you're going to go put up at the venue. All of this other logistical aspect that makes these events cost, hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars. And so that's the kind of thing where it's like there's just a lot of potential that is completely untapped. Basically software was never doing this, right? There's greenfield, and so I see that across the entire marketing stack. I think it goes beyond marketing too, and I think we're certainly passionate about the end-to-end go-to-market, not just what you might call marketing, but also like the kind of tie-in to your go-to-market engine from a sales perspective.
That sounds really exciting, because also those areas or points that you mentioned, it's not necessarily something that a human would necessarily want to do all the time, and it takes a long time to find the right outcome. And with an agent, there's probably a lot less human error, and they could probably tell you, like, if you book somewhere but it's closed down or something's happened, it will probably be able to tell you more than maybe a human would.
Well, I think it can just do things faster, right? Because you can parallelize. And again, it's manual work, right? It's like, there's been times where I've been trying to plan an event where I've had to call, 5 restaurants, and, they're all reserved or they're all booked up. And imagine if when I was driving to work, I could say to my agent over the phone, hey, Gradial, can you go start planning this event? And Gradial just goes and works on it in the background. And so I actually maybe was able to start planning my event, a month earlier, because I actually had time to just give that, handoff to the agent. Now I'm able to go get those restaurants booked. I don't have to be on the phone doing that. I could do something else. I think those are just the things where there's a lot of low hanging fruit. And it's not, it's not just one place. It's really all of the different aspects of these projects.
Nice. And finally, if listeners remember just one thing from today's conversation, what would you want it to be?
Well, I think the capability overhang is a really good one, which is, there's still so much to do. And I think AI companies in some ways have been very good at building their brand and building this kind of narrative that everything works, right? But I think the last mile of the economy is still very much untapped, in the sense that if you were to say, like, what fraction of the potential of the models is being fully utilized by the average company, I think we're still at 10% adoption. I think we're still at 10-15% adoption. And that's a very exciting thing, in my opinion. It means that there are entire companies and aspects of the way that work is done that have yet to be discovered. So I think that would be my main thing, which is, we're certainly excited about that here at Gradial, but I think it goes beyond marketing. It goes beyond the use cases that we focus on. Like, there's just a ton of potential that, is theoretically possible, but just hasn't really been delivered yet.
Nice. Thank you, Doug. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. So thank you for all the insight.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was great to have a conversation.